Hi everybody, welcome to another segment of Women's Wednesdays Guyana. We are back live for a bit. I know you guys have missed us. We had to resort to the pre-recording, which is a less fun route but the more reliable one. Today we're sitting with Dalgety from Blossom Inc. Guyana. Now, you can tell me a bit about Blossom Inc.
Okay, yes, Blossom is an NGO that was basically set up to support the child protection system in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with children who are victims of extreme trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, what that equates to is children who are victims of rape or extreme physical abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So we do the trauma counseling, forensic interviews, victim support, court support, tracking the cases through the system, that's the child protection system, the police, the DPP, and we just pull together a multidisciplinary team in order to just effectively serve children.
Okay, that's a very wide kind of comprehensive system you have
Yes.
working there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I know with regards to child care and protection, there's a lot of difficulties with regards to it. So since you were the founder of Blossom, what would have kind of pushed you in this area then to try to found your own organization and start that work?
Okay, I think I've always been someone who advocated for children's rights. So, I mean, I was always the one outside a nightclub talking to street children instead of inside partying. It was always my field. So I think when I remigrated to Guyana and I thought, okay, what can I do? My background is child protection and I'm a systemic therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy for me to kind of fall into that route. So I think I was just searching. And at the time, the Child Care and Protection Agency, the director at the time, put out a call for agencies to come on board. And I thought, hey, okay, I'll do that. And I kind of jumped both feet in and then thought, what the hell have I done? But, here I go. Blossom was formed and we're up and running and we have partnership agreements and doing a lot of work.
So how long has it been founded now?
3 years now.
3 years.
Yes. November last year made it 3 years.
Okay, so now with regards to some of the work Blossom that you see you do a lot of work with regards to child rape and stuff. So I
Yes.
want us to talk a bit about that. Now, people when they think about child rape, they always think it's this scary person, this scary stranger then come in to steal your children when they don't realize that often it's usually like a family member
Yes.
or somebody close. So I want you to talk a bit about your experiences with Blossom and some of the dynamics then with regards to child abuse and some of the myths we know about it.
Okay, well, at Blossom, and certainly what's reflected in Guyana is that most abuse occurs with family members.
Mm-hmm.
Most rapes, it's within the family or close relatives. So it's father, stepfather, uncle, close family friend. We call everyone auntie and uncle. So it's mostly within the family. I would say at least 90%.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at least 95%. It's with a family person. Again, it's never that scary person. It's always a person in a position of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something we have to talk about a lot in Guyana. Of course, with everything that's been going on recently, the bishop's case, all of that person in a position of trust, it's always the one who's going to violate a child.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we see all the time. Of course, there's a rise in reported cases of boys. So I think obviously some of the awareness work is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I always think I'm the wrong person to ask when people say, what's the prevalence of rape in Guyana for children? And I think, please don't ask me that.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I do day in, day out. The first 7 days this year, we had 9 reports.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you think the first 7 days of 2018,
9 reports of 2018?
we got 9 referrals in for children who had alleged rape. So you can imagine, and that was just our agency and just the children. So you can imagine the scope of the problem that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and you see, that's the thing. I don't think people realize how wide it is. As you said, this is Blossom, one organization. Now imagine the reports across.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even like the even I know help and shelter and all. You did get reports almost daily about this sort of thing, and it comes back to the idea where people think again that rapists or harassers or these strangers in the dark ready to get you. So they fail to educate their children, they fail to protect them, give them the information they need.
Yeah, I think I always sympathize with parents because I think they just don't know how to talk to their children about sex, about rape, about inappropriate touching, and it's something that we have to learn how to do.
But you see,
You know?
the problem is why we don't talk about it is because even when we ourselves were children,
Yes.
when they themselves were children,
Mhm.
they were never talked about it, right?
No.
There's a
No.
whole culture of shame surrounding it, and
Exactly.
people feel as if you educate children about something, then they might go do it. And I don't think people
That
understand
is
the
not
flaw.
the case. People do not understand. That is not the case, you know. But I think the most difficult thing is how do you talk to a child that it might be a family member, you know, so they're the only ones who should be touching their private parts, you know. I want to say the word vagina and breast and
Which-
bum and so forth.
which are
but,
the
you
words
know,
we should
which are
be
the words we
using.
should be using, you
Yeah.
know, private parts, and then you know some child will think, well, you know, is that my elbow, you know?
Uh-huh.
So use the words as is, you know. It's not a problem, you know. It shouldn't be a problem.
I have a daughter, Atina. She's gonna be 6 this year, and before I became actively involved in like advocacy work and stuff, I never really knew how to talk to her. You see, because it was the kind of information we were getting. You're never encouraged to tell your children certain things, so it took people telling me, talk to your child. Talk to your child about this, tell them about sex, well, age appropriate related
Yes.
information. That's very important,
Yes,
right? To make sure
yes.
it's age appropriate. Now, I talked to her, told her, well, this is the difference between a bad touch, what's a good touch. If somebody touches you or asks you to touch them, then you know what to do, or you go to an adult. And these are the kind of things we need to tell children, because we can't say, well, it's not going to happen to my child. Look at all the
Exactly.
cases of child abuse
Exactly.
that's happening all the time.
Exactly. And it's always good to check in with them to see if they understand what you're telling them, because often what we teach children and what they learn is completely different things.
Yes.
So you should always just check in with them, you know. Did you understand what mommy said? Tell me a bit about what I just told you. You know, and see what they come back with. You know, I had an interesting conversation with my daughter the other day. So it occurred to me, I should ask her what she thought I did. So I said, you know, what do you think I do at work? She said, oh, you work with children who are victims of rape, she says. I said, okay. I said, so what does that mean? She said, well, you work with children who, you know, adults have done bad things to them. I said, so what does bad things mean? She said, well, you know, mommy, you know, it's all about touching them inappropriately, you know, in their vaginas, you know, and their bums, you know, and, you know, sometimes their mouth. I was like, okay, yes, continue driving, straight face.
Yes,
you know?
she understands
So she clearly,
perfectly.
yes. You know, and sometimes I think maybe she heard me over the phone, because I remember I talk to them all the time about it, but certainly not the mouth part, you know. So I'm like, okay, yes, you know, compose myself so that I can continue, you know, the conversation normally. But they do tend to shock you with the things that they know, you know, or because I cannot remember having the discussion about the mouth.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah, that's
there
why
we go.
that's one of the reasons why it's important to
Yes.
talk. You see, because children also get information from outside,
Side, yes.
right? So it's very important that even if they have information from outside, you're a source now they can come to and try to
Exactly.
get certain information.
Yes.
Now, you brought up a point earlier about increased reporting with regards to boys,
Yeah.
right? And I know that's always been a kind of large problem, because across the board, reportage is a very large issue. We have very low levels of reporting, but more so in the cases where it's the sexual assault and where it's males. There's the added barrier of victim shame.
Yes.
Right?
The taboo is just so high, and you know, and it's how we deal with boys as well. You know, how the police deals with boys, how the child protection agency deals with boys. You know, I think we're learning more how to deal with boys. You know, and I think that's where this specialist forensic interviews that we do at Blossom is really, really important, because we talk to them in a developmentally friendly way, you know, about the experience that they have had. So, you know, it's not like these pointed questions, so, you know, who did this person did do this to you, and, you know, almost sometimes the way we ask questions, it makes them feel like it's their fault. You know, so we would ask general questions. So tell me everything that happened. You know, tell me a little bit more about that, and just let them talk freely in their words. You know, and before we would clarify like certain things, we'd find out what do you call your private parts. What do you call the penis? And they will tell us so that we know that, okay, when they say this word, this is what they mean. Because of course when we do a forensic interview with a child, we want to make sure it's so sound that when it goes to the DPP, we can get charges.
Yeah.
Ultimately we want charges. But with the boys, I was saying you really have to be extremely friendly and extremely, caring and tender in dealing with them, because it's such a huge step to tell their parents and then to get it reported and then to go to the Child Protection Agency, then to go to the police, and then to come to us.
Yeah.
It's a lot of steps and a lot of shame for them involved in that. So we really, really have to kind of embrace boys a lot better.
Yeah, and it comes back. I don't even know the police. I have such high issues with regards to the police and victims of sexual assault, right? Because like a lot of them, they're not trained. I mean, they've been making efforts to kind of make it better with regards to sensitivity training and all of that. But I think the police force is still severely flawed with regards to the way they deal with sexual assault allegations.
I think it's difficult for them. I mean, I work with the police and I work with some very good officers from the sexual crimes unit. I think unfortunately, it's always the young police officers that are put in that unit. And it's always the females. And sometimes we have to think that people come with baggage as well.
Yeah.
People come with baggage. So, whoever we work with, we have to know that, think about what their stories might be as well. So I think they try. And a lot of them have benefited from the forensic interview training, but it's a work in progress, and we will get better and better and better as we work together. Because, of course, we're trying to build the capacity of the police as well and work together. So we must continue doing that.
Yes, definitely. I know you mentioned one of the aims is to always get charges. I noticed recently Blossom would have gotten one of their cases through the courts. Yeah, you want to tell me a bit about that?
Very happy about
that.
Yeah,
she was very happy.
Well, we were certainly one that advocated for the whole special court. So, like, thumbs up to those two women, who the acting chancellor, she's still the acting chancellor, and the chief justice, that they got the court up and running. Then, of course, the judge in the court, she has done, for me, she really understands the issues of rape and the trauma that goes with rape. Because remember, sometimes it's not just the court system. At the end of the day, these are capital crimes.
Yes.
And so they are tried, and then a jury has to make that final, decision. And the jury, our population is a very special population. Let's just put it that way. Because, a judge can direct and can say and sum up the evidence, and then you get to the jury. And I know I've heard jury members say, well, she asked for it. These young women hot these days, and they forget about the evidence. And they're so busy judging the child that they forget that I've just heard evidence. So, we have to really continue doing awareness to the population, because the jury comes from the everyday man on the street.
Yeah, that's true. So, I was reading a Stabrook News piece recently, and it was talking about a case with the jury wherein it was a child. The child was raped, and yet the jury, despite the evidence and even several jury members voting to have the person charged, the overall rule was that he was like, even though they knew to themselves that he was guilty, right? So definitely.
Yes, they looked at everyone else but the child. They looked at the fact that, the mother didn't turn up to court. I wonder why the mother didn't come to court. So they were creating their own stories in their heads and not actually looking at the victim and looking at the evidence. So a lot of work needs to be done with, with our population to kind of sensitize them and make them aware of the trauma that goes with rape. And then I always have to remind people that rape it's a personal crime, It's not like somebody's going to rape a child and say, you know what, come everybody, come on, let's look, I'm raping a child now. It's always, just the victim and the perpetrator. So it's always going to be her word against his, and with children in particular, we have to remember that it amazes me how adults can blame children for rape. You know, a child is 11.
Yeah.
The rapist is 45, but somehow it's the 11-year-old that is to blame. I say, how does that work? You know, how does that work?
Mm-hmm.
You manage to blame an 11-year-old for what a 45-year-old adult has done. No one can answer me that question.
You see, and that's the thing about victim blaming
Yes.
is that it's not based on any real solid foundation, right? The only intention is to basically place the blame on the victim and remove the perpetrator from the
Yes.
situation entirely.
Yes.
Now, what are some common trends you would have noticed with regards to child sexual assault in Guyana?
It's, what are some of the trends?
I know recently you told me that reports would kind of up during the Christmas season, so that's kind of
Yes.
like a trend.
Yes.
Mhm.
During the holiday periods, of
Yeah.
course, the holiday periods, children are home more.
Yeah.
So of course, more opportunities for things to happen. So just after the holidays, when children go back to school, it's often you see a rise.
Mhm.
After Christmas holidays, after the Easter holidays, after the summer holidays. You know, after any kind of holiday period, you notice, because of course then they get back out into, let's say, the open everyday life,
Mhm.
and so these things start to come out. Yeah.
Okay.
And also we're getting a lot of younger children now. 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. You know, and that's always quite heart-wrenching. I think some of the awareness is working, so a lot of parents are a lot braver, or they're speaking out a lot more.
Mhm.
So I think maybe that's one of the things. And of course, more children are going into nursery settings. You know,
Mhm.
before children would be cared for at home, so everything kind of remained at home.
Yeah.
But when they get into nursery settings and they get into school settings, then of course they're displaying these behaviors, and adults see,
Mhm.
you know, or people in positions of trust notice and they question. So so I think that's why we're seeing an upsurge in that area. Because
Mhm.
you know, everyone in Guyana, we like education. You know, get your child into school as soon as possible, and that actually aids, that helps us. So for me, if a child needs to go into nursery as early as possible, that's a good thing.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, get them out the house.
Get them
quickly.
out the house. Yes, out the house.
Some added benefits there
Yes.
also.
Yes.
Now, with regards to, you mentioned the role of the parent.
Yes.
Now, I've heard some stories of some parents who would know about the assault of the children, rape of their children, and because of certain societal factors, whether they might be dependent on the person or they just don't believe necessarily, you see them not reporting these crimes or encouraging that abuse to carry on. How do we deal with these situations? Could parents be culpable in that, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
You know, and I think until we charge a parent or an adult for not reporting, I think it will continue.
It will.
Because I always say children speak, adults don't listen. Adults just do not listen. We do all this awareness with children,
Mhm.
and then they're not able to talk to their parents. Because, you know, if the perpetrator is a breadwinner, you know, the parent is likely to not want to do anything about it. And then, of course, in a lot of cases, parents just do not believe. They just don't believe. It's the most spectacular thing, really. Parents do not believe their children when they allege rape. I don't know why. I don't know what stops them from hearing that, but they just cannot cope with it. But, you know, when you talked about trends, sorry, going back a bit, I know certainly what we have seen at Blossom is for every child that's raped,
Mhm.
you have to think about whether that parent had been raped as a child.
Mhm.
And certainly our figures at Blossom shows that a high percentage of parents have been raped as well.
Yeah.
So that is yes. And how do you deal with that? Or you have to deal with that, you know, because how does the cycle stop? So certainly from our figures at Blossom,
Mhm.
and we have certainly dealt with and had to form groups for parents who have been sexually abused, and now their children are sexually abused.
Not by the same
No,
Okay.
it's just the cycle continuing. The parent
Wow.
has been abused, sexually abused. The child has been sexually abused now.
Mhm.
No, not by the same person, but they've had an experience of rape in their lives.
That shows kind of how persistent and common the problem really is when you think about it.
And sometimes some of them have never talked about it until coming to blossom. You know, they've never told anyone that they were raped as a child. And then they come into blossom and they're dealing with their child, you know, and you notice something is a bit off. And then, you know, in the therapy sessions, you come to realize that, or the parent as well disclosed, well, they were also raped as children. So it's very, very kind of sensitive work.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, we have Alana King. Alana is saying, so then we can't charge a parent without fully investigating the family background. Now, I think when it comes to enablers, we really have to up our game with regards to holding them accountable.
Yes.
Because you have to realize that certain behaviors will not continue if there's not like a culture in which that is being enabled.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So if, for instance, you brought up the bishop's case earlier with regards to Cohen Jackson. Now, he was teaching for like close to 2 decades across several schools, allegations in almost all these schools.
Yes.
And you telling me that people didn't quite know about this and didn't see a chance to stop this? I know one of my friends was telling me that when she was attending business school, she actually saw him making out with a student, and that's why he was removed from the school. So I think that people like these are culpable in these kind of crimes. How do we begin to hold them accountable?
And if he was removed, that means an investigation happened at the school.
Apparently,
so
yeah.
Other people in positions of trust knew this. And
but you see, the interesting thing about that, I said I didn't expect anything different to happen when the owner of the school himself has been engaged with school children in the school also. And this is something that is widely known. You go to any student in a business school and they'll tell you about that. So you see, we know about these people, but then we don't necessarily have persons coming forward, and that's one of the problems always with the reportage.
Yes,
right?
and that is why we need to actually now start charging people. You know, I'm a great advocate. We have to start charging adults.
I like her. She was like, I want them up.
Yes. No, because we have to send a strong message that adults are accountable and responsible for these things. In the Sexual Offences Act, you must report. We have to report. You know, cases of sexual abuse. It's very simple.
Yeah,
you know? I say that, but it's actually probably not very simple.
You said that, and it brought to mind even the MCC issue, where that young boy was raped by the constable, and then you had the other constable who saw it, left it until the next day, and then we have all the other counselors who knew about this, kept it under wraps without reporting it. I don't think people realize they actually have a legal duty to report these things to the police and the Child Protection Agency.
Yes, and I think maybe we need to do a lot more work on that. You know, with through awareness campaigns that adults need to report. You know, so.
You know, one of the things I wanted to bring up with regards to children, and often we don't notice when they are being abused because we've not been taught how to identify behaviors then that might be implicit of them being abused. And I know a lot of times when children act out, for instance, there was this one case where a young child was accused of touching another young child, and when you actually got into these things, you realize that this stems from the home situation. That child is seeing this at home, or they're being acted on home, and then they bring that into the public space. So when you see children like that, I always ask parents to be mindful with regards to when there's 2 children involved, because the child is not doing it because they have some agenda or motive to possess some kind of power of the other child. They're doing it because they themselves might be victims of that same kind of abuse. So it's very important that you try to identify and
first, whether it's just totally innocent and they're just acting out what they see at home, or whether there's something more sinister. But normally with children, it's just acting out. You know, if you're talking about 2 4-year-olds, 2 5-year-olds, whatever, they're just acting out. You know, some of it is developmentally appropriate, some of it isn't. But you know, it's best not to go all guns blazing and think, something wild is happening. Just, gently, gently, just investigate and see, have a chat with the parents that maybe children aren't supposed to be exposed to such behaviors. But if you're talking about a 5-year-old with a 12-year-old, now that's a problem. But 2 5-year-olds, 2 6-year-olds, but where there's an age gap, there is a problem.
Okay. Now, with regards to some of the work Blossom has been doing, now what are some of the activities you guys have done since your founding them?
So as I mentioned, we do trauma counseling, we do the forensic interviews, we also do some outreach work in the outlying areas. We have a center in Essequibo. So we've been out to Kapui and to Akawini, just doing awareness sessions on sexual abuse and trying to set up watch groups. So that's a work in progress at the moment. So we go, we meet the community leaders, like sexual prevention watch groups.
Okay.
So basically these groups would kind of act as the gatekeepers. So if a report happens in a outlying area, they could be the first port of call, and then they kind of escalate it, or they know who to call to make reports.
Okay.
Because Guyana's got some really hard to reach areas.
Oh boy, yes, that's always such a problem.
Yes.
And now you have these things occurring in some interior location. Who really can you go to hold them accountable, right?
Exactly. And the perpetrator disappears into the deep forest, I should say,
Yeah.
I think Bartica, at the moment, it's showing Bartica has the highest incidence of sexual abuse, but it's the gateway to the interior. So getting the perpetrators is just incredibly, incredibly difficult, for the police to track. And of course, with this thing where in Guyana we have everyone has a call name, so a child can report rape. Who did it? Blue shirt man. Does he have a name? So it gets very, very difficult.
What are some of the challenges you would have faced with regards to doing the work you've been trying to do?
For us, it's always funding is a big issue.
Yeah,
funding
there's a problem for everybody.
Problem, especially the climate now in Guyana. So we get funding from the Ministry of Social Protection, the Child Care and Protection Agency. They fund probably half of our work, and then the other half we have to find. It's just incredibly, incredibly difficult. Companies in Guyana are not at the moment given or not in a position to give. I find I always say we work on the very dirty end of the scale. So people like to give, if it's a spelling bee competition or if it's giving books to children. But the moment you mention the word rape, you could literally see a disconnect. People begin to disconnect. They're like, well, don't they just want like a pair of shoes? Can't I buy them a uniform? And I'm like, well, we're sending the children to school not really ready to learn. Because if you've been raped and you're suffering from severe trauma, how exactly do you think that child is in a position to learn? Can you pay for some therapy? And it's like, about those school books, So it's very, very, it's very difficult. People literally disconnect. It's too hard for them to hear the word rape and to deal with it.
Yeah, and it all comes back to our education and the things that we're taught. Because if you're taught from young, well, rape only happens to certain people and these kind of things, right? You have all these rape myths. We did a whole segment on rape myths where we looked at things with regards to the myth of boys not being raped, women getting raped because of being dressed a certain way, right? And it all comes back to re-educating yourself about these things.
Yes. Now, I had a conversation with a friend the other day about that. She actually said to me, she said, I have to go away and really rethink how I've been doing donations. Because she said, I just thought, I could do a little one-off, 10,000 here, maybe, get them snacks, I'm like, I understand, it will take, in my experience, it takes someone I've spoken to 2-3 years before they get to a position where they think, okay, I want to help in a really meaningful way. I'm just not looking for a quick fix. I just don't want to, buy a school uniform and say, okay, well, the child has been raped, but go on to school now. It takes them about 2 to 3 years in my experience.
Oh, you have
to
a
get
time
there.
frame.
Yeah, I know, because this has happened with me so often. It's happened so often.
Okay.
They're just, people cannot hear it. They just cannot hear the word child rape or rape of children. It's very, very difficult for them to deal with.
And
So,
even that, I think a lot of people understand that the importance of doing childcare work and protection, particularly with regards to rape. But you see, I think we have a largely individualistic culture, right?
Yeah.
Where we say, well, it's not my child get raped, or it's not nobody
Exactly.
close to me that get raped. Why then should I go out, spend my money, do protest actions and these sort of things when it's not directly influencing me?
Yeah.
But you see, that's the catch.
That is the
That
catch.
is the
Yes.
catch, because when you disregard those experiences, you make it so much easier for your close ones to
Yes.
also get raped. And even if not, why would you just say, well, it's not my problem?
Mhm.
That's not necessarily the way to deal with these sort of things.
No, it's not. It's not. But it yeah, as I said, it takes about 2 to 3 years
2
for
to
a
3
person
years,
to,
so we'll
come
check
to
back in
grips.
about
Yes, to come to grips with, let me fund an organization that works with children who are victims of rape, and let me fund it in a meaningful way. Let me see a child through therapy. Let me not just focus on, buy, is it poor children? Can I just buy a pair of shoes? Can I just, buy some lunch?
Immediate gratification. They
immediate
don't look at the
gratification.
long term.
Yes, exactly. And we're sending these children to school not ready to learn. They're just not in a position to learn. When you're such extreme trauma, you're not in a position to learn. And then we look at it, oh, she's not doing anything in school, she's gazing away, or he's gazing away. He doesn't learn, his ears hard, or there's nothing between his ears. And yes, there's things between their ears, and it's called trauma. It's called emotional abuse, Yeah.
Now we have one viewer here asking about volunteering programs, possibly of motivational speakers going into schools and talking these topics like once a month. I'm a big fan of these, but the problem with this is always getting dedicated people and also people who would actually be able to speak on these issues, because you don't want anybody going and talking to the children
Exactly.
and telling them things that might be contrary to what you're actually trying to get across, right?
I think it's important, this is professional work that we do.
Yeah.
And I think people don't treat it as professional work. So they think, oh, anyone can go and give a talk. Actually, no. Anyone cannot go into school and give a talk on sexual abuse or to deal with what might come out of that. It is professional work, and it needs to be treated that way.
Yes.
So people in Guyana like to have a chat, and then they call it counseling. Yes, I've counseled that child, or I've counseled. Okay. It's professional work, and people study for many years to actually be able to do this kind of work.
And then with regards to even the little, I don't even know if it's not counseling necessarily, but when you think about persons trying to counsel children that would have gone through some kind of trauma, there's always the concern of confidentiality.
Yes.
Right? That's always a very big issue. Confidentiality.
Yes.
Now, if I'm a victim of assault or something, and I tell you about this experience, I need to be sure that this ain't going nowhere. Particularly if I'm not ready for it to be shared with anyone but you.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about volunteering for these sort of things, we also have to think: are these people, are they trained?
Are they trained?
Will they abide by certain confidential measures?
Exactly.
These are all of the questions we need to ask, because we're dealing with children.
We're dealing with children, and they have to be safe.
Yes. Okay, so Ayo, anything else you want to tell me about Blossom? What are some of the future plans you might have? Some of the things you've been working on? So,
well, what we're planning next onwards and upwards, we're opening a center supposed to be the first quarter of this year in Bartica.
Nice.
So we'll have the first child advocacy center in Bartica. In the latter part of this year, we're opening a center in Linden. Linden also shows high figures. So that should be the model center in Guyana. So fingers crossed that we get that off the ground. So in Linden, we'll have a multidisciplinary team sitting together. So basically, the Blossom staff, the Child Care Protection Agency officer, someone from police, someone from medical. You know, we have them all sitting under one roof so that when a child comes in, it's a one-stop shop, really.
Yes.
To offer them the services that they require.
Awesome.
You know, so yes, so we're working on that. We're hoping to do a lot more, like kind of spread our wings a lot further, you know, than just Georgetown or the East Bank.
And that's one of the problems with a lot of advocacy effort. It's so centralized, right? And I can understand it because you want to start somewhere and see how that might work in other areas, but a lot of times it never moves past Georgetown. It just stays
because it's getting a model that will work in our landscape. You know, getting a model, because sometimes, like I struggle to find staff in Essequibo. I just struggled to find anyone with the qualifications that I needed, because everyone, they come to Georgetown and they stay in Georgetown. So the professionals stay in Georgetown, so then it's difficult to find staff. And I think maybe that's a large part of the problem with kind of reaching the outlying areas, you know, getting the staff to do the work.
Yeah, and I know, actually, because I know some people, when they're posted to outlying areas, just be so angry, they don't want to go. And I mean...
There's nothing to do, you know, and then especially if they have families, you know, then, you know, do they up their children and move to an outlying area and they think, oh, is the school system as good out there?
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of dynamics going on with that, I mean, I've been to some of the outlying areas and I too think to myself, God, to live here.
I like the bush. I would just go move in the bush, honestly. So any last words you want to offer? Tell the people, please fund Blossom's work. Sorry, they need money to continue doing their work.
Yes.
Not 2 to 3 years from now. Let's try to do this now, okay? Yes. Children need it, so.
Children need it, and adults, you need to listen to your children when they allege or when they report abuse to you. You need to listen and you need to act. Yeah, a lot more work with adults. I said I stopped talking to children. I'm now talking to adults about child sexual abuse. Yeah.
Hope you're listening. Thanks for tuning in and sharing your thoughts. See you again next week.
Thank you. Bye.